Welcome to the Unfettered Speech Podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Leonard Goodman.
Well, Len, we have a very exciting and special guest today.
We do. Scott Horton is an anti-war activist, and he's also, his voice has been really prominent in independent media, especially in the last, I think, as you sort of put it, he's sort of blown up. Had an interview with Tucker, and I think it's wonderful that people are starting to hear anti-war voices. The other thing I'll point out about Scott Horton is that, he has really important shows himself. He's one of the few broadcasters that has covered this case that I tried down in Tampa, where the federal government prosecuted activists, American citizen activists, for political speech, and really related to the war in Ukraine, which I know we're going to get into with Scott. So I'm excited to have him.
So, Scott, I've just finished not most, but many parts of your marathon 4-hour podcast with Lex Friedman, which was fascinating, and I recommend it to everyone. So much good stuff there, and really, I mean, the time flies by. If anyone's in a long 4-hour block or a long car ride, it is an amazing conversation. So I wanted.
Are you talking about the debate with Mark Dubowitz?
No, just your conversation with Lex Friedman.
No, it's only 4.5 hours if you put it on double speed. Even though the interview is 10.5 hours.
Is that right? Okay, I didn't realize it was that long.
Yeah.
Maybe it's okay. Anyway.
Yeah, we went till like 1:30 in the morning.
Well, I listened to parts of it, and it was amazing. And I think there's so much that we could cover with you, but you've covered a lot of places after what I thought was 4 is actually 10 hours. But you've come where you are now as a leading voice in the anti-war effort, and you've got a lot of things going on, an institute and a antiwar.com and a couple podcasts. You mentioned in that interview about being a high school kid and being skeptical of, I think, the first Iraq War or Bush's election, and therefore what was going to happen next. And so, I just wondered if we could start before we get into current events. Could you just tell us about the arc of your life and career and the way your thought, the evolution of your philosophy? Because you mentioned high school, and then you mentioned a few other incidents in your life, but it would be interesting for you to put it all together. And it seems like you were always an anti-war skeptic.
Yeah, well, I mean, my parents are Democrats, although not like far liberal ones or anything. They're just kind of very center left types. But I'm from Austin, Texas, and all my teachers, of course, were always very liberal and all that kind of thing. And so I was definitely not raised Reaganite in any sense like that. So during Reagan and Bush Sr., I had no particular love for the ruling regime. And I was really excited for Iraq War I just because I'm a boy and I like explosions and jets and tanks and cool things. And I didn't give a damn about the Iraqis because I was 15 and basically a psychopath. And so I just thought that was fun. But I still was not like a partisan Republican who like really got into H.W. Bush as a personality of a leader or anything like that. It was more like, well, the president says it's okay to engage this and indulge this bloodlust, so we'll just do that, kind of a thing. But I knew that I was suspicious of the way that he said he didn't need a declaration of war. He just had a UN Security Council resolution. And that really got my interest as I was still just in 9th grade. But I knew that was a problem, that was the way that he was framing it. And he did ultimately seek an authorization from the Congress, although not a declaration of war. But he had originally said he didn't even need that. And so that was something that really, got me then. And then, as I think what you're probably referring to that I mentioned to Lex was when Bush Jr. announced that he was running for governor in 1994. Oh, I guess I'll go back one step. When Bill Clinton was running in 92, I wanted to see the Republicans lose, but there was obviously nothing really to believe in there as far as he went. He's obviously just some scumbag or whatever. But then I was just kind of getting into conspiracy stuff, and there's a book by a kook named William Pierce called, no, not William Pierce, I'm sorry. I'm so old now, I forget the guy's name. William Cooper, called Behold a Pale Horse. And it's all New World Order conspiracy crap. But the point is, at the back of the book, it had this big chart of elite membership in basically the Rockefeller organizations, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the Bilderberg Group. And the way it's presented, This is not exactly right, by the way, but it was presented as a like this is the real Congress. This is the real government of the country. And it includes, of course, all three branches, but also academia and science and big business and all these leaders. And this is where the real consensus is made. And this is essentially the real secret government. And so then after Bill Clinton was elected, but before he was inaugurated, and I'm pretty sure still in ninth grade. No, I would have been 10th grade here. Um, so after he was elected, but before he was inaugurated, just that first month in January, back in school after the new year, but before the inauguration, I saw an updated list. It was the exact same chart of the membership, only now instead of H.W. Bush, it had Bill Clinton at the top of the pyramid, or not really pyramid, but the top of the chart. And he was a member of even more of these organizations than Bush Sr. was. He was a member of the Bilderberg Group too, whereas Bush Sr. was only a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. But so to me, this was really enlightening because Bush Sr., of course, is the cousin of the Queen of England, has the bluest blood in the country, is a Bush, is a skull and bonesman. His family goes back to the Mayflower. They're Episcopalians. Like you talk about original heritage Americans, that's them. Bill Clinton is just some scumbag bastard son of some prostitute down in Little Rock, Arkansas. He supposedly is nobody. He supposedly is the reason we're supposed to believe in American democracy. It's because even the boy from Hope can become the president if he, plays politics right and the democracy chooses him and all this. When like, oh no, he's not from Hope at all. He's from Wall Street. He's Rockefeller's man. He's owned completely. And then, of course, very, very soon after that, the stories started coming in, which we already knew about the Reagan administration selling cocaine in Miami and LA. But then very soon the stories started coming in, or at least to greater prominence. I started first hearing of them about all the cocaine that was also coming into Bill Clinton's Arkansas, to the Dixie Mafia there under the control of his buddy Dan Lassiter, and how they murdered the two boys on the train tracks and pretended that they had fallen asleep. Oh, they smoked a joint and fell asleep on the train track. Yeah, and all of this stuff, all that started coming in then. And of course, it was George Bush Sr.'s cocaine. And Bill Clinton was just receiving it. He wasn't even in charge. He was just the governor while all this was happening in his state. And he obviously knew about it, was allowed to be part of it. This was supposed to be a big conspiracy theory until they made a movie about it with Tom Cruise a couple of years ago called American Made, where he plays Barry Seal, the guy whose job it was to fly back and forth with guns and drugs and money, arming the Contras and being, and selling drugs to Americans that then the national government can use as an excuse to lock them up. So that was, a very, I'm just lucky, right? Just, it was perfect, just time and place and happenstance and my antenna being up to see who Bill Clinton was as simply a guy who you would in any other circumstance, you would consider him an agent of Bush Sr. And here he's the guy who humiliated and replaced him, huh? And then what's his first order of business? To get the Democrats to pass NAFTA, which Bush Sr. couldn't pass, but Bill Clinton could, because it was, the Democrat-controlled Congress of that era and all that. So that was my kind of introduction. Then was the story that I had mentioned to Lex, where as soon as I saw that W. Bush was running for governor, I saw it immediately as a fail-safe. They're running Jeb in Florida. Okay, a Bush wants to be a governor. But as soon as I heard that they're running both of them, I said, oh, you see what they're doing. They're making sure that one of these guys will be in his second term for the year 2000. And then we'll be able to become president and then take us back to Iraq. It only makes sense because it was the humiliation of Bush Sr. being unelected while the dictator Saddam Hussein is still in the chair. And everybody said what an embarrassment that was for him. It's a matter of family honor and all this crap. They're going to have to go back to Iraq. And I could just tell that by then. I guess I was in 11th grade. I may have said 10th on Lex. I'm pretty sure I was in 11th grade by then. And I told Laura, the fat math teacher, all about it.
It's funny, you bring me back to the Iraq War One, and you're a lot smarter than me. But I remember what bothered me about that war isn't Kuwait one of these wealthy countries? Why can't they have their own military and defend themselves? Why do we have to send our troops over there? So,
yeah. What's funny about that too is, and again, I was only in 9th grade, but I was very interested in that story. I watched the news all during the buildup and during Desert Shield and all this. I was so interested in it all. You know what words I never heard? Tell me if this is the same for you. Here's words I never heard during that entire thing. His Royal Majesty, King Al-Jaber. Al-Jaber? I had to look that up later, right? They never said the name of the king. They never said we're fighting to restore a monarchy. Yeah. Which has been overthrown by a fascist dictatorship.
It's all for freedom.
royal monarchies are morally superior to fascist dictatorships, or however you measure that.
Well, if
Scott,
I
I want
remember,
to.
they sold that war based on aggression, right? Which is a little bit like the Ukraine war, that there's a principle here. Monarchy, no monarchy, we're talking about aggression. If he can do that, then, if one equals two, then two equals three, and before long, we're all going to be. So I think that's what I remember them selling is, this is really not about the monarchy so much, it's about aggression.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
remember if they said it's about
they
democracy.
omitted the monarchy altogether, right? That's
Yeah.
my point. Is they didn't tell you this is what we're fighting for. This is what America, the world's oldest constitutional republic, does. We go around restoring monarchies to their thrones.
So you had a sort of contrary bent even when you were in ninth grade, and
Oh, yeah.
the
Well,
fact
I'm
that
a
you noticed
skateboarder.
these things, you were the kind of person who did. I'm sure a lot of your classmates did not, right?
Yeah, and when I was a kid, skateboarding was really kind of a outlaw thing in a way that it's not now. So we're like very anti-government from the time we were
Rebel.
11 or 12 years old, and I probably was like that already anyway. But especially like the first time I ever met a cop in the wild, he was pure National Socialist, and so then that made me a member of the Rebel Alliance against him, from the very beginning.
Scott, I'd like to ask you. You're you're so knowledgeable and such an authority on these disastrous wars that have consumed so many of our resources and wealth. Of course, you wrote this important book that helps understand the conflict in Ukraine and what brought us to that conflict that has also taken so many of our resources. I just want to ask you first: do you get invited to share? And you wrote this amazing book, which you sent me. Thank you, Provoked. Do you get invited to share on mainstream media? I know you've been on Tucker Carlson and you've been all over the place and incredibly busy, and so we've gotten to hear you. But I'm just wondering whether you get invited on mainstream media. And I would note that mainstream media regularly invites shills for the war industry to come on and
Sure.
give their opinion without identifying them as shills. And the other thing I want to ask you before you answer is just, has there been a true anti-war voice on mainstream media since Phil Donahue was kicked off during the run-up to the Iraq War too?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, no, I don't get on TV. I was a regular on the Kennedy show on Fox Business Channel there for a while, and I'm afraid to say I'm not taking credit. I think I actually am a big part of what got her in trouble. She's still a regular on Fox Business Channel, but she doesn't have her own show anymore, and that is possibly because of my big mouth. I never did bring up Israel. I didn't. That would have been like deliberate sabotage, right? I wasn't going to try to do that, but I did. When I think back on it, I probably like could have like dialed it down a little bit. Um, so I'm afraid that I actually am part of why she doesn't have her own show anymore. I hope I'm wrong about that,
Well,
but
same thing happened to Tucker, so you're
yeah,
in good company.
yeah, and Pierce Morgan really, I mean, he has what I don't know 600,000-700,000 downloads every time I'm on there on YouTube. So I don't know
Right.
about the rest of his podcast feed and whatever who all else is hearing that and how, but he's I have to say, like when the Iran war broke out, they sent a van. I was out at the Pork Fest campground out in rural New Hampshire, in northern New Hampshire, and they sent a van out there, video van out there, to film me in the parking lot, talking about the war in Iran, which is something that could have never happened in the Bush years. Where, if you think about like, Bill O'Reilly or any of those shows, CNN, Glenn Beck, or any of that stuff, I could have never been ahead in a box complaining about the wars during those times on those stations. Where Pierce Morgan, I don't know if he's really cares, but maybe he's just completely mercenary about it. He just thinks, hey, that Horton guy likes talking and gets some clicks. Let's put him back up there. And they don't mind having me on there, even though I'm saying whatever party line would have me not say. He keeps giving me the opportunity to go on there. And so then I guess it kind of builds on it, right? Where if these different people are taking me seriously, then other people do. So then Lex Friedman decided he wanted to have me on, and Tucker Carlson decided he wanted to have me on, and that kind of thing. So it's getting there more and more. And as far as like a real voice out in the major, like actual TV hosts. I don't guess there really is one now. I mean, in terms of popular characters in the culture, Ron Paul was the very best one we have. And I think Dave Smith is the best guy we've got going now. I mean, he's on Rogan again today. He recorded it last Friday, and the episode just hit. And guarantee he's saying to whatever 10 million people or however many people, 20 million people listen to that show.
You make a great point. You make
great
a great
stuff.
point that mainstream media. I mean, this is partly why I think people don't trust mainstream media
Right?
anymore, and they're going to alternative sources, which is really what this show is about, is to try to invite people who are breaking through in independent media. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think it just kind of shows by relief. I think it's part of some of the reaction that I get when people go, well, where's this guy been? Right? He apparently knows all of this stuff. He's clearly been working on it all this time, but I'm only first hearing of him right now. So why is that? When quite literally, I've been at antiwar.com this whole time. You can find my archives. I've been podcasting and sending out, shows and whatever for 20 years now. 22 years I've had a download, interview feed going on. And so, but the answer is because, whatever media of power and influence, they were never interested in what I had to say. And so then turns out, yeah, I do have something interesting to say after all, once you give people a chance to hear me. I saw one of the comments on the Lex Friedman interview was I saw 10 hours and I thought, there's just no way I'm going to listen to this. But now I'm a couple hours in and man, I could listen to this guy talk all day. I'm learning all kinds of stuff. What fun. And so the thing is, like, they've been, it ain't, I'm not talking about me, but just the overall narrative. They've been deprived of it.
Yes.
Where are all the people who can sit here and tell you, this ain't true? And especially, I guess the real answer to that is there are a lot of people on the left to look to debunk these lies. There are fewer on the right, and there are fewer that are prominent enough that people know of them to look to. So, you could be a regular person out in society for many years and know a lot of things and not even know that there's such a thing as the American Conservative magazine, where they've been holding down the anti-war view this whole time. You just might not be exposed to that kind of thing. You know what I mean? And so, especially, I think my big benefit is people who don't lean left, when they hear it from me, they don't hear the kind of language that are typically built into left-wing arguments that would automatically turn them off. Like, oh, we need to save that money for public schools or, whatever kind of things that liberals believe. I just don't talk that way. And so they understand. They're like, okay, in the same way that the example that Ron Paul set, like, you could be all for gold and guns and property rights and American flags 100% and hate this foreign policy and be completely against this foreign policy. If you like your identity, you could keep it. You don't have to move left at all. You can be exactly who you are. Just stop being stupid on this one thing that you've been believing in that you shouldn't have. That you
It was
shouldn't.
eye-opening. I'm sorry, go ahead. Just 1 second, Pat. It was eye-opening with Ron Paul, just that he was the only voice in either the Republican or the Democratic Party that was blowing people's mind, really.
Yep.
And so go ahead, Pat.
Well, I was just going to say, what do you think happened? What's your analysis of what happened to the left? Because we're back talking about the first Gulf War. In those days, the opposition to it was coming from the Democratic Party and the left, and there was an anti-war left, and today there's not. Can you sort of trace that line and what happened there? And why
Sure.
is it now that most people, if they're anti-war, they're probably some sort of libertarian slash Republican who doesn't trust what the government's doing, and everyone on the left or the Democratic Party thinks that these intelligence agencies and the military is keep quote unquote keeping us safe. How did that happen?
Isn't that crazy? It's so disappointing to me. I mean, so I'm born in 76, right? So after Vietnam, but raised in the shadow of the thing where all good liberals and leftists knew that the government is just all nothing but liars. Think of all the Vietnam War movies of the 80s era, or even like I always think of, maybe this sounds silly to people, I don't know, but I always think of the Stephen King movie Firestarter, which is basically about like MK Ultra, CIA doing, torture drug experiments on this little girl, and then they give her these crazy powers for now she can start fires, whatever. But the point being that like the government is illegal and secret and covert and dastardly. This isn't your security force. These people hate you, dude. Their office is some weird plantation where you don't even know there's a government office, and they're running torture experiments in the basement. These are our protectors. They're bad men. They're the kinds of people who will sell you cocaine and then lock you in prison for buying it from them. This is who they are. It's who they've always been. So, but then it's just partisanship. It just rots the mind. I mean, to me, and this is just only weeks after what we were just talking about with me finding out about Bill Clinton is actually from Wall Street and not Arkansas after all, is that then he burned all the Branch Davidians to death and he called it a suicide. And the only leftists in America who stood up for the Branch Davidians were Bill Hicks and Alexander Coburn. And every other American liberal said, burn them, kill them, because I want to watch soap operas and game shows, and they're right-wing Christians, and I hate them. And the purpose of the national government is murdering people I don't like and their children. And there was a 93% approval the next day in the polls and 2 days later in the polls for the government going in and crushing those people. They made a foreign nation out of this little piece of property in Northeast Waco. They turned David Koresh into Saddam Hussein, said he's crazy, so we can't negotiate with him. He's got illegal weapons. You can't allow that. And he's bad to his own people, so we got to go liberate him. Exact same thing they did in Iraq War II, writ small, destroyed those people. But it was Bill Clinton who did it in his first 100 days. And his wife wants to put gays in the Delta Force so that they can murder little kids in their church too. And so it's all good. And so that showed me exactly who liberals and leftists are when it comes to, well, not so much leftists, because if they're leftist enough, they'll be really bad on economics, but at least they see the Democrats for what they are, right? And they're not beholden enough to the Democratic Party to then bend their morality to it. A good leftist sees the Democrats as a bunch of right-wing corporatist imperialist murderers, which is exactly what they are to a good leftist, is a proper way to categorize them, right? So there should be nothing to believe in there for anyone who learned anything from Vietnam or from the Reagan era at all, Iran-Contra, all of that stuff. But then, and the same thing for the conservatives. When I was growing up in the Bill Clinton years, in the post-Waco era, all the conservatives hated the government. G. Gordon Liddy said the ATF were jackbooted thugs. And he said, when you shoot at them, you got to aim between the eyes and the upper lip in that kill zone. So you drop them immediately, was what Liddy, who was a former federal agent, said. These men are in violation of the law and they deserve to be handled by free men the way free men handle their business. That was the feeling, the sentiment on the right. And then what happened? Oh, Bill Clinton cheated on his wife. Boo hoo hoo. I heard the president is of low moral character. Meanwhile, I thought we were about to destroy the ATF, the FBI, the IRS, the Federal Reserve. We're going to tear them down brick by brick. We're going to set this country free. Oh, no, you know what we're going to do? We're going to enforce conservative Christian mores on our presidents. No matter how frigid their wives are, they are not allowed to get any action for 8 years. And so that was it. By the time in 1998, they had reduced their entire opposition to government to just their opposition to Bill Clinton. And when he was acquitted in the Senate after they covered up his rape of Juanita Broderick, and they acquitted him in the Senate, he immediately launched an aggressive war against Serbia to break off Kosovo, and the Republicans rallied around him, at least the leadership of the Republican Party rallied around him. Government is great. And so, that's their religion, is the warfare state, and that's how Bill Clinton helped to solidify his support from them. And then W. Bush runs for office saying, I want to have a humble foreign policy because Bill Clinton is so belligerent. And the right-wing street out there, they want to hear that, regardless of, what the Weekly Standard and the National Review want. Out in talk radio land, we don't believe in Bill Clinton. We don't believe in nation-building missions in Balkan states we can't find on maps. We want to come home. We don't want to be the policeman of the world. And then George W. Bush comes, and after the greatest failure of any president ever, after 8 months on the job, America's own mercenaries hit us in New York, and his approval rating goes to 90%, and he goes straight to war. They pass the Patriot Act, illegal spying, torture, and the American right lines up behind it. Do we say we were anti-government? What we meant was we love government more than our own families. And we love the lies they tell more than any truth we can read in the Bible, because we're Republicans now, kill them all. And they became more statist than Bill Clinton on his very worst day for 8 years solid, right? And then what happened to the Democrats? Well, before the Republicans were all the way gone, in 2006, the Democratic Party climbed back into the majority of the House and the Senate on Cindy Sheehan's back. Remember, this was the poor woman whose son, Casey, was killed fighting the Shiites that he was fighting the war for in Sadr City in March of 2004. And he was sent to go rescue another group of guys who had got sent in there for no reason and pinned down and was killed. And Cindy Sheehan, I'll never forget the initial reports. I remember like where it was on the page on antiwar.com. Woman tries to throw herself in her son's grave at his funeral. So Bush told her, well, it was for a noble cause. And she didn't have the nerve in the moment to ask him, well, what noble cause is that exactly? So then later she said, I want to know. And he refused to meet with her and he refused to talk to her. All he had to do was just have her for dinner and say, trust me, lady, we're working on freedom. It's going to be great. That's all he had to do. Or just meet her in person, shake her hand. Instead, he ignored her. So she made a camp out at called Camp Casey outside of.
I visited that camp.
Oh, did you? Good.
Yeah. I was living in Texas for a brief period of time. So
yeah. And so it was this huge camp outside of his so-called ranch, which was just a set that they bought when he was running for president in the year 2000. He never even owned that the whole time he was governor, the whole time he lived in Texas up until 1999. When he announced he was running for president was when they bought that stupid piece of property for a set piece. Boy, did people get fooled by that. God, they're so incredulous. But anyway, so Bush refused to meet with this woman, and just because he's a piece of shit. And so she made this camp and stayed out there all through July and August of 2005. And they built up this whole kind of anti-war movement on her back, and it helped to propel the Democrats who pretended to care for her and sympathize with her for the next year and helped get them the House and Senate back in 06. And as soon as they got it, that was it, man. You know, I would prefer to blame Barack Obama because he's just such a better target. But man, the truth is the Democrats settled for measly, stinking Nancy Pelosi. And when she came in, what was the first thing she did? She financed Bush's escalation of the war and sending of 30,000 more troops to Baghdad in the surge of 2007, helped him fight the war for Iran more and worse than before. And by then, the Democrats of the Daily Kos blog, they didn't give a damn about the people of Iraq anymore. Oh, it turns out they never did. All they care about is their own power and influence and keeping those evil Republicans at bay. And so everyone inside, if you have like a graph in your mind of the left half of the American political spectrum, everyone like within reach of the Democratic Party were completely captured, shut their mouths, never said another word about war, even before Barack Obama ever came to town. And then when Obama came to town, they pretended to be anti-war, but only to give him the advantage over Hillary, because they liked him more than Hillary. And then only they pretended some more to give him the advantage over McCain, but they never meant it. And remember Obama's calculation when he came in. McCain and Graham and the military are pushing and pushing and pushing for an Afghan surge. If he does that, he might piss off the Democrat base. But if he doesn't do that, he's definitely going to piss off John McCain, who is going to never shut up about it. And then what did Obama calculate? He calculated that the Democrat voters of America, the Daily Kos bloggers of America, they don't give a shit about the people of Afghanistan. They don't care about American soldiers and Marines either. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and send 70,000 more troops to Afghanistan. We're going to extend this war by another decade and then lose anyway. And the liberal Democrats and progressives and leftists of America, they won't care why. Oh, swoon, because Obama is tall, dark, and handsome. And they like him. And so they don't care who he kills. They don't care. They didn't care at all when he turned around and launched an aggressive war in Libya, when he started backing Al-Qaeda, suicide bomber, head chopper, child murderers in Syria, when he turned the Yemen war. He switched sides in Yemen. He was backing the Houthis, killing Al-Qaeda terrorists. Then he turned around and said, no, you know what? We're going to take Al-Qaeda's side against the Houthis, and backed them, Saudi and UAE, in a war of absolute genocide from 2015 for 2 years through the end of his presidency, where they killed hundreds of thousands of people, deliberately targeted all of their farms and food and water resources, fishing boats and markets and everything that they could possibly do. It was like the Israeli war in Gaza that Obama helped to do. And the Democrat voters of America, they didn't care anymore. And because after all, the other guys are worse. The other guy, ooh, he's a racist and a fascist. Oh, and this is the other big one, right? Is after Obama comes Trump, and the CIA and the FBI and the Democrats frame him for treason with Russia. Now, if this whole Russiagate hoax had been launched simply as a psyop against liberal Democrats to make them love the CIA, then it would have worked in spades, right? Because here was a democratically elected president, but the CIA and the FBI are telling us, trust us, we have secret information you don't know about, which proves that no, he's not. That in fact, he's a traitor, and he, in league with the Kremlin, no less, has usurped Duchess Hillary Clinton's rightful throne and has stolen it from her in this coup. And so now, don't worry though, the supermen of the CIA, the same ones who lied you into war in Iraq and Libya and Syria, same ones backing suicide bombers in Syria, even up to that moment. Oh no, they're going to protect you from the evil invasion virus, the takeover of the country, the takeover of the executive departments by the man who won the election of 2006. And so in doing so, they turned all good liberal Democrats into slaves of the national security state, as they were seen as the inoculation. They were seen as the antibodies protecting the body of the country from the evil infection of Donald Trump. This is the same thing, by the way, that happened. One more thing real quick here to make the analogy, is this exact same thing happened in Egypt. After the Arab Spring in 2011, they held free and fair elections, and the Muslim Brotherhood won, barely, on the parliament and the presidency. So what did the liberals do? Did they create the Liberal Democratic Party to say we're the alternative to the religious conservatives and vote for us next time? No. Instead, they took Saudi money and they worked with the CIA and the military to pretend to do another kind of pseudo Tahrir Square protest and justify the military intervening and overthrowing the Muslim Brotherhood and recreating the military dictatorship. Now they're never going to have an election again. It was the first time they had fair elections in 5,000 years in Egypt. They had their chance, they barely missed, and then the liberals turned against the entire process itself and said they would prefer that the Egyptian national security state overthrow the democratically elected leader because he was from the right-wing party and they wished he hadn't won. That's the exact same thing that America's damned Democrats did in 2016 through 19 in siding with the state against the democratically elected president. And now they might as well be slaves. Right now, their brains are just absolutely leashed under the control of the national security state. Who else will protect us from the winners of our elections, if not our permanent secret police forces?
So I remember being in Times Square one evening, and there was a march that went by, and it turned out it was a march. Must have been the night that Comey got fired, and there was a march in Times Square
For the FBI director.
I turned to my wife and I said, "Well, who goes out of their house to march for a bureaucrat? What is going on here?" And so probably it was USAID funded and instigated, and those people had no idea that USAID was behind it. Probably the same in Egypt and Tahrir Square. The USAID was behind that. How do you see USAID, knowing what we know now about them, as being not just behind foreign interventions that we've been involved in, but in domestic politics?
Well, I really wish we knew more about their role in domestic politics. I mean, I think it's really clear when, the more research I've done about the color-coded revolutions abroad, you start seeing really the same things over and over, where they say, well, there's actually really no such thing as Georgian Pora. It's just the name of this loosely connected group of like, wait. I've read the exact same phraseology, the way that they talk about Antifa. oh, there's really no such thing as Antifa. It's just this idea of this leaderless resistance type thing. That this is literally exactly how USAID, NED, and the IRI and NDI, that's the International Republican Institute and National Democratic Institute, do it all over the world. It's how they did it in the Balkans, in Georgia and Ukraine twice, and Belarus over and over again. They've never quite succeeded. They've tried 3 times in Belarus. They did Kyrgyzstan and in Lebanon and in Iran. Now, in the Arab Spring, it's interesting because they had been, and we've been covering this on the show. They've been planning for years to try to figure out what were they going to do about Egypt, because Hosni Mubarak's son was ineffectual and was not going to be able to inherit the power. So then it was like, well, here we're talking all of this about doing Iraq in the name of democracy and all of these things. Maybe we need to figure out if we can get some liberal Democrat types to get elected there. So the NED was really grooming all these groups. And then when the revolution broke out in Tunisia next door, all those same groups were activated, and I'm sure to some degree by the Americans, except very quickly that turned into a very real revolution where you had the entire political spectrum from left to right, and in Alexandria, Giza, and Cairo, and everywhere. And it was egged on by Al Jazeera, which is the Qataris, who are very close with the Muslim Brotherhood. So that was part of it too. But it was also that the entire population of that country wanted rid of their American-backed dictator. And this is part of what led to the disaster of the Libya war, was they looked so bad in Egypt. Where like even on CNN, it was like, geez, America's foisted this guy on this population for 30 years, and apparently they don't actually like him. And it just made us look really bad. So they thought they needed to compensate for that by getting out ahead of the thing in Libya. And in that case, it wasn't the Muslim Brotherhood. In that case, it was literally Al-Qaeda guys who'd just gotten home from Iraq War II were leading the revolution there. And that's who they took all the way to Tripoli in that one in 2011, by the end of October, I guess, 2011. So that was part of that, was like an overreaction to their humiliation in Egypt, where, again, they overthrew the dictator, but what happened, the conservatives won the election too, and so they had to cancel that and support a coup against him, against them, I should say, just a year and a half later. But as far as what goes on here, look, I think I'm very suspicious of all that Antifa and all of those things now. There's a very famous, at least on the right, it's very famous. I don't know if your people have heard of it, but there's a in-depth article in Time magazine from after the election of 2020 that's about how they saved the election. But then when you read it, boy, it's how they rigged it, just how they rigged it for the liberal Democrat side. And in their mind, they saved it. So they don't mind admitting how they did it. But they go to a great degree in explaining not just how they got Mark Zuckerberg to pour in all of this money and how they did the mail-in ballots and all these things, but also they explain how they can turn these left-wing protest groups on and off like a light switch. And like one of these that was really obvious was, where were all the leftists on January 6th? They were nowhere to be found. And the reason why is because they've been told don't go, and they didn't. Like 100% of them didn't. And then they were showing, and she explains it pretty well in the article, how, the George Floyd, the summer of the George Floyd protests and all that, that was very artificial. There were people very suspicious, like, who's dropping off pallets of bricks in these neighborhoods and this kind of thing. They were doing this on purpose as part of a destabilization campaign against Trump. It was a form of color-coded revolution of sorts against him in 2020, is the way that they played that. And, I'm not saying that they deliberately leaked the virus out, but when the virus was out, it was not a coincidence that it was all the Democratic governors that locked their states down the hardest, because yes, that hurt them. It reflected badly on them, and they could have lost their governorship over that. But oh, well, you might have to take one for the team, because what you're really doing is you're helping destabilize the United States of America, and you're helping to increase the stress on the population of this country and turn that resentment against Trump. And after all, remember, Trump tried to put out pictures of the riots and say, this is Biden's America, but it was Trump's America where the riots were happening, right? And where he was hamstrung and for whatever reason, did not call out the National Guard in order to quell the protests. Maybe he was threatened by his own government that they would resign if he did that or some kind of thing. But they talk about in that article where not just protests, but rioters are being turned on and off by Democratic Party officials from on high. And it must have been through, yes, USAID and those connected NGOs is how they do it. So there's something, just like with the Clinton Foundation, there's something for the current Department of Justice to really investigate. You know, some of their claims about how the election of 2020 was rigged were wrong, but that doesn't mean that some of these other things that really were true were not criminal, because I think some of them really were, especially when you're talking about the mass property destruction and even killings that took place during those riots.
Well, Scott, again, like you're smarter than me. It took me probably until 2009 to sort of walk away from the Democratic Party. I'm sort of more of a traditional lefty, but I believe Barack Obama. I'm from Chicago. I believe Barack Obama was anti-war. In 2008, I was out in Grant Park celebrating, but by 2009, my eyes had been opened. First of all, I was representing a Guantanamo detainee. He promised to close the place. He didn't. He bailed out the banks, the drone wars. But let me move ahead to where we are now. So Trump got elected partly claiming that he was an anti-war person. Maybe he
Yeah.
genuinely is in his heart. I don't know. But I remember early in his presidency, he talked about, I'm going to meet with President Xi of China, and we're going to talk about, we don't need all this war spending, this military spending. We're going to talk about cutting the Pentagon budget in half. And then maybe 2 weeks later, probably have the dates wrong, all of a sudden he's announcing a $1 trillion defense budget, which really, you can't call $1 trillion a defense budget. That's a war budget. You have to have wars to spend $1 trillion. You need more than one war. So, do you have any insight into how that happens? What is the mechanism that makes Trump go from, we don't need all this war, to saying we're gonna spend $1 trillion on war in my administration?
Well, first of all, I would say that one way to look at this would be that even Donald Trump, in other words, like anyone from your town, could tell you that this is crazy for us to keep going like this. We can't afford this. And the world shouldn't be like this. One of the things in the same series of statements that you're referring to there, one of the things that Trump said was that, look, we could slash our military budget in half. I want to do a treaty with Russia, China, and us together where we all agree to slash our militaries by 50%. I want to do a new nuclear treaty where us and Russia get down to only the level of nukes that China has, and we get China to stop where they are, and all these things. That's what would make sense to any group of just dudes sitting around drinking or whatever, right? That makes sense. That's smart. But when you're the president, you don't have this low time preference and these broad, plans for the future of your country and mankind. Your focus is now this year and next year, and you got midterms coming up. You got donations. You have what Obi-Wan Kenobi calls the economics of politics that now immediately intervene in all of your calculations. Public choice theory that says that, look, if the Democrats win the midterms, then it doesn't matter what we want because we won't get anything that we want. So therefore, all of our issues now, all of our agenda has to bend around making sure that we get to win the midterms. And then, of course, immediately after that, we got to immediately work on, no matter what, we got to win the next presidential election too. And so everything is skewed around that. And then how do you
Donors,
win?
basically, is what you're saying. Yeah.
So look, let's just say it's the three of us up there. I'm president. You guys are my advisors. And we know what must be done, right? We're going to slash the Pentagon budget down to $250 billion. And we're going to completely slash the government departments, right? We're going to leave just enough of the energy department to hold on to the nukes. Otherwise, gone. Commerce, education, and as much of the welfare state as I could possibly get you lefties to agree with me on has got to go and be devolved back to the states and to the people. It just is unsustainable. We have a $37 trillion debt and counting. We're paying more on interest on the debt every year now than we're paying even for militarism or for Social Security or for Medicare, right? It's just intolerable. We can't do this, okay? The three of us agree. Now, and we got the Congresses. I won with a 90%, majority, whatever. Congress has to do whatever I say. And yet, if we do this, we are going to cause a massive dislocation in the order of power throughout the world, where now South Korea and Japan and Australia and everybody have to refigure who are they dependent on? How are Germany and France and Poland and Italy and Britain and everybody, how are they going to figure out Who's in charge of what now? Who's the dominant power in NATO now without us? All these things, all of that immediately comes into question. And we have a great recession in the United States where the national government has just refused to spend trillions of dollars that otherwise the economy was expecting to be forcefully redirected in these and those ways. And so we're talking about a massive correction, firing, and you're talking me, I'm the president, we're talking about millions of national government employees who now have to go and get a real job.
And I might remind you also, Scott, that the last president that tried to do that, what happened to him? JFK. So
Yeah, and I'm not even sure he was willing to go that far, but they weren't even willing to let him consider it, right? And so then that's the thing is, now I I think I understand. Maybe you could say I just believe enough in free market economics that I wouldn't be that worried about it. I think all those people could find a real job, and that if we stop destroying all this wealth through militarism and stop redirecting it from the people to the government to distribute, then people would do a much more efficient job of putting each other to work and creating wealth and improving the society in every way. I think our great recession will last, I don't know, a year at most, and then we'd be fine. Let the bad debts get liquidated. Let all those brilliant engineers go get jobs figuring out how to distribute goods and services to people more and better instead of just putting firepower on targets.
we could use high-speed trains, you know.
Sure. And like even just think of purely the brawn of the manpower of our million-man army that sits around not constructing things when that's what they could be doing. This the opportunity cost that is wasted here. It's incredible. But we got to be honest, right? As you just said, they would shoot me in the head because it's too many people who have too much money to lose too quickly. They're not interested in what's good for America over the next 100 years. They're interested in what's good for them now. And the system has been so rigged to transfer tax money to the pockets of special interests that to begin to fix it would be a revolution. And this is why Ron Paul has always said, like, one, yes, we absolutely have to build consensus, but we also have to recognize that this whole thing is probably not going to come to an end until the dollar breaks. At some point, they will have created too much money to liquidate their old bad debts, and people will just lose their faith in the currency. At that point, our boys will be hitchhiking home from Germany because the government can't find another way to get them here. And the government will then be broke, and we'll have to figure out how to lop all the zeros off of our dollars and start over again in a South American style catastrophe. It should not have to be that way, but that is clearly the path that we're headed on now.
Well, I mean, part of it, the problem is, right, it's the dollar, the fact that the dollar is a reserve currency, so we can borrow all this money, and we can pretend to American taxpayers that this is all, we're not having to pay for it. But in fact, the bill is, as you say, Scott, the bill is going to come due at some point. We can't keep 800 military bases, and you know, who is this? It's not benefiting the American people, and I feel like people are starting to wake up thanks to voices like yours. That this is just not, it's not sustainable, and it's not in our interest. Who is profiting from this? It's not ordinary Americans.
Yep. I think that's it. Unfortunately, it's I really should study this. I only kind of know of it, but the public choice theory is this branch of libertarian political economy studies, right? That says that it's kind of a wonky term, but it just means there is no real national interest or public interest. There's just the interests of the individuals who work in the government making these decisions, and they do what's good for them rather than what's good for the society overall. And of course, probably most of them believe that, well, geez, if it wasn't for us, society would be doomed. So of course, it's just implicit that what they're doing is in the common good. You know, they assume if it's what they think is right to do.
Well, when you hear in the Americans, this is in the interest of Americans, what they mean is it's in the interest of their donors. It's their donors are concerned about return on investment.
And not only that, though, but just think about the careers of all the national government employees themselves who are making far above market rates to work in these government departments. The admirals and the generals, it means a lot to these guys to have all those fancy medals on their shirts and to have all these golf courses around the world where they get to go and stay in their fancy villas and all of these things. they're living the high life, man. The imperial caste, the ruling caste of the military itself. And think about we have no idea how much money goes in and out of the CIA and how much those agents and officers get to keep for themselves and all the benefits that they get. But it's extremely lucrative work. And you can see how, what do they do when they quit those jobs? They never go get a real job. They always go get a job being a lobbyist or a consultant or some kind of thing for these same firms.
Well, that's where the money is. It's the next job. So even if you're a general, you're making a little bit of money, and you, as you say, you get treated pretty well. But your next job is going to be at Raytheon or whatever, and then you're really going to cash in, right? So
Yep.
every politician retires as a multimillionaire. Every general retire. They, what is it? About 78% of generals end up in the military-industrial complex after they retire.
I'm
It's a
not
huge
sure, but
number.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
Number.
Kelly
So that's where
Vlahos
you
wrote
go.
this. Kelly Vlahos wrote this great article for the American Conservative a few years ago about how the the wealthiest counties in America are all around Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And this is a
Yes.
real change. It used to not be that way, right? It used to be steel towns or Silicon Valley, obviously Manhattan, you would think, New York City. No, and this is, what are they doing? They're taking tax money, they're taking government money. And like Ronald Reagan used to talk about the welfare queen in the Cadillac. They're
Right.
like, yeah, that's right, dude. These are all of these people are making salaries and dividends far beyond their worth in the market. They're using the violent coercive power of the state to force all of us to pay their way. And, as Thomas Jefferson once said, justifying himself, that no man would labor when he could make someone else labor for him. Like, yep, that's the name of the game up there in Washington, D.C. Exactly, right there,
And then
Scott, one question before we have to wrap up soon, but one thing I wanted to ask you, a lot of times when I have discussions with people about, what we're doing right now and kind of our imperial posture in the world, people say, well, what else would you have us do? What would a world look like without the US patrolling sea lanes and,
Yeah,
bottling up China and, having 800 bases? It's all necessary to keep us safe and free. How do you see a post-imperial world? Do you think about that? Like, what would the world
sure.
look like without a U.S., with
Yeah.
$1 trillion of military
Well,
budget
so
to
first of
spend?
all, I mean, I'm just a total non-interventionist. I wouldn't justify any of this, right? But like, I can argue from just all other things being equal, if we just renounced our doctrine of unipolar power and just accept the fact, I mean, first and foremost, just on the basic level, we did everything we could to get Russia and China to stop being communists. Well, guess what? They've made trillions of dollars since then, right? Would we prefer that they're all laying down dead, starving to death? No, we helped encourage them. You know what you guys need is markets and property rights and prices. And they were like, oh, okay, is that how it works? And so now China can afford a navy, which means not that they can rule the Pacific Ocean, but they can keep us out of their part of it. And so, yeah, that was always the deal. Even Charles Krauthammer said it's the unipolar moment, not the unipolar millennium from now on. It makes no, which that is kind of what Libby and Khalilzad said, right? That will never allow a near peer competitor. But that's just crazy. They had their moment to remake the world the best they could before anyone else could intervene in their processes and whatever. And this was the best they could do, okay? The terror wars, the catastrophe in Ukraine, and the tensions in the Pacific and all this. But now you just got to realize, and this is a long time coming, that there are other major powers in the world, namely China and the EU, although the EU is virtually, entirely with us. Russia is a major middle rank power, if not a major power, but they count as a major power because they got 7,000 A and H bombs. That's enough for you. And then, but you have India and Brazil are making more money now, right? There are other countries that are like becoming powerful enough that they at least want to do business with each other and exclude American power. A big part of American dominance in the world is, as Leonard was mentioning, is American dollar hegemony, where we've essentially forced the world to adopt our currency. And after all, not really force them. I mean, everybody else's currency is also inflationary crap and mostly worse than ours. And so they're, since World War II, all other things being equal, you're better off having stacks of $100 bills in your central bank vaults than anything else other than gold itself. And so other countries have been very dependent on the dollar, but then that makes them very susceptible to American economic warfare. But then, so what do we see in response to that? We see the rise of the BRICS, where these other countries are just saying, you know what, we're going to just go ahead and use our own currencies in our international transactions back and forth and freeze y'all out so that you don't have the ability to, put us up against the wall every time that you don't like something that one of us does. And look at the threats where Trump, he dropped this, but he was saying he was going to put a 500% tariff on India and China if they don't stop trading with Russia, because he's so mad that they, for their dealings with a third nation. And that kind of bullying can only go so far until you end up just driving the rest of the world away, where they just decided, actually, we're not going to take that from you. And so that's the way things are going. And, that idiot Victor Davis Hanson, who killed 1 million Iraqis, I don't know why anyone would ever listen to him ever again. But he says this is the Thucydides trap. Whenever there's a rising power, the waning power has to fight them. Well, yeah, only if you're a stupid idiot who thinks that somehow America is an East Asian power. Now, 100% of the Pacific is an American lake. If those things aren't true, then, maybe we actually don't have to fight China at all. Maybe we can just accept the fact that it's actually a good thing, and it was a good decision that we made to help them abandon Maoism and become a wealthy first world nation, and that we have to accept the consequences of that means that they are able to maintain their independence from us. That doesn't mean that they're truly an aggressive threat to our friends in Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and this kind of thing. If that day comes, talk to me then. Right now, the biggest threat is supposedly that they'll take back their own renegade island that Richard Nixon recognized, the American president recognized 50 years ago, was a part of China, and that America would like to see them reunited someday, hopefully peacefully, not by force. Well, maybe we should just negotiate that. Like the Brits helped to negotiate reuniting of Hong Kong with mainland China so that Taiwan could look more like Hong Kong than, say, for example, the Donbass, where everything's been completely destroyed. But the Russians are getting their lost province back one way or the other there. So I think.
But it gets back to that mentality I'm talking about. If you
right?
didn't have Taiwan to block China, they'd have access to the Pacific. So therefore, we have to block China. But they never really get to the heart of it. It's okay. Well, why do we have to do this? It's like that scene in Doctor Strangelove when they don't want the Russians to see the big board. Remember that?
Right.
And it's like it's never explained why they can't see the big board. It's just you don't want them seeing that. And it's the same. It's like, well, we've got to contain them because if we don't contain them, they wouldn't be contained anymore.
Right. That's exactly right. And so I'm saying, now forget that. The Chinese, seriously, man, I'm not any kind of utopian, and I don't lean pro Chi-Com, right? But let's get real. These guys just watched George Bush and Barack Obama blow America's brains out, and they want to replicate that. They want to go and topple and occupy and control the Middle East and Central Asia and Eastern Europe. Why would they do that? They say the threat is that China wants to build this giant belt and road across Central Asia. Well, don't they have to kiss up to everyone in order to accomplish that?
Right. If you've got a road there, then you're under the sway of the people who live there.
Exactly. And China is very resource dependent. They barely have any oil at all. They have some of these rare earth minerals and all that, but they don't have that much of a domestic supply of major minerals. I don't know what their total of iron ore is or whatever. I know they import a lot, and they import virtually all of their hydrocarbons. And so, and their timber too, they get their timber from Russia and elsewhere. So if they really get that far out of line, the whole world can just turn their back on them. They don't even have to sanction them or do anything to them. They just have to stop selling them things, and they could cut them off. They're dependent on foreign imports and inputs in a way that the United States of America and Russia, for example, are absolutely not. Right? The whole world could boycott us, and we could actually be okay. We have enough resources here. I'm not saying I recommend autarky, but I'm just saying a global economic war against the United States wouldn't kill us, right? But with China, they're extremely susceptible to that. So I don't think you have to assume good intentions or benevolence on their part. They probably want as much power as they can get. But this goes back to the question of time horizons, not to give too much credit to dictators or whatever, but when you know your party's not going anywhere, maybe you can plan in a little bit longer term kind of ways. You know what I mean? Where the Americans are so short sighted because their time is always almost up. And it just doesn't make sense at all. I can't imagine. I mean, boy, if the Chi-Coms are dumb enough to try to replicate the American empire, if we retrench, then good luck to them. I mean, I think really all that would mean is the fall of their power sooner. And this is sort of the lesson of the Cold War, right? Is America contained the USSR and contained them and contained them and contained them until finally the American people didn't want to contain them anymore after Vietnam. So then Brzezinski and Slocum said, oh, I know, let's bait them into overexpansion. And we don't want them in West Germany, but how about if we get them to invade Afghanistan? Those people are expendable. Who cares about them? We could bog down the Soviets and cost them a bunch of money and weaken them strategically. And then what happened? They lost, and the Soviet Empire was gone in a decade. Because they, inflicted this strategic defeat on them by finally allowing them to expand. It's the same thing they're trying to do to them in Ukraine right now. So let's give them a crisis to bleed them dry. The same thing that, the bin Ladenites and their friends just finished doing us in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Well, not that the bin Ladenites were there after the first couple of months, but you know what I mean.
But we can never declare victory and go home. It's like Orwell predicted, that that if you're going to have a continuous state of war, which is really what the donors want, you have to have enemies, and there's sort of this seamless shift from one enemy to the next to justify. I mean, how are you going to justify $1 trillion? You got to have. You've got to have war. You've got to have big enemies. You've got to have conflicts where can keep the assembly lines going. So maybe we can have you back sometime to talk a little bit about war profiteering and how we can end this, because it seems to be sort of a feature of the West, this war profiteering. I know Pat and I have talked about this, that you really don't see it as much in China. I mean, they certainly have their capitalists, but this is the only country where we're completely beholden to the war industry.
Yeah, it is a captive market, and it's completely captive, right? Like in the worst sense of that term.
And as you've pointed out, I'm sorry, just one second.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I could just add this. As you've pointed out, the war in Ukraine in your book Provoked, the war industry, a lot of these theories that get us into these conflicts come out of the war industry, like expansion of NATO, funded by Lockheed Martin and the lobbyists. And so I know you've got to go, but maybe we can have you back sometime and explore some of that. Go ahead, Pat.
Just today, the Trump administration sort of floated the idea of they just took a stake in Intel, taking a stake in the defense contractors. So they're probably watching this podcast because we were suggesting that a while back, that they should just be nationalized, and then you wouldn't have this profit motive anymore.
I used to kind of think about that, entertain that, but then you still got the mines, nationalize the mines too. And like all the different workers and all the things, like at some point, all these government job holders are just as greedy for their position as these, profit seekers are out in the pseudo marketplace here, in the contractor marketplace, let's call it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just would rather have our weapons makers making a government wage rather than buying their third home in the Hamptons and at our expense.
And which, by the way, I think is a perfectly reasonable argument that all government contractors should be cost plus nothing, right? This thing cost plus, where they have not only they get to have a profit built in on their bid, but if the costs keep going up, their profit margin stays intact. And this cost plus, it should be the exact opposite of that. It should be that, listen, General Motors, you're a giant successful corporation. Well, we need you to devote part of your industry to militarism because the Pentagon needs these tanks from you and whatever. And no, you're not going to make a single penny off it. You're going to do it exactly at cost because it's necessary and you're part of the United States of America and you think it's worth it. And if it's not worth it, then we wouldn't be doing it.
Right.
It's the same thing with abolishing conscription. If anybody was really attacking this country, you think you'd have to force people to line up to go and kill them? No way, dude. Any, Unitarian pacifists are going to grab their rifle and go and fight if there's an actual threat to this land, to our freedom and our life here. The threat that some foreign government try to take control of our people. Hell no. You don't need conscription for actual defense. Only if you want to force people to do what they don't want to do. Same thing for the war industries. It's, by the way, there's total precedent for this. For example, the national government had said to AT&T, well, you guys are patriots. We want you to run Sandia National Laboratory for us. And they said, okay. And they're not, whatever profits they were making were not that much. It was basically meant to be a public service by them for the national government that they would run it. And that was, I think they change off which corporations run them, but they have these kind of contracts where they hire these firms to make not much profit, but do it out of a sense of duty to the country that we have to keep these things up and running. You know that. And so you do it. Well, that should be the same for everything. That should be the same for the combat boots and the M4 rifles and the howitzers and the HIMARS and the ATACMS and the fighter bombers and the long range bombers and the aircraft carriers and the hydrogen bombs and everything else. Nobody gets to make a profit off of this. This is dire necessity, or else we wouldn't be doing it. And if it ain't dire necessity, then we shouldn't be.
Well, Scott,
yeah, go ahead, Pat.
probably wrap up, but we want to thank you for all you do. And it's really exciting that you're blowing up the way that you are and getting your word out there. And, it's interesting. You talk about the facts. You talk about exactly the details. Your new book, Provoked, is, brings all the receipts in the Ukraine war. And it's amazing. And, I think pivoting to that next step of the vision that you have for a world where people cooperate with one another and you have to work this stuff out without without the threats, without the force, they work out how to live together on one planet is amazing. That's something that you don't hear in the corporate media, and that's why we like to hear from you, because that's why everyone does, I think, because people are thirsty for people with perspectives like yours. So we appreciate everything you're working on.
Well, thank you both very much for having me. I really appreciate that and appreciate being here with you.
Thanks, Scott.